Okay, and so we're back for the second session here. I'm delighted to have these three fine gentlemen with us who will take us through where we are in this transition. So I'm going to start with you, Jigar. We've just heard an awful lot about the Inflation Reduction Act. You're responsible for administering, was it $250 billion? Is that the number?
I mean, you know, what's $1 billion between friends?
So tell me where we are. What's the government doing right now to get us through this transition as fast as we can?
Well, you know, I think it's important to recognize that we've always been an extraordinary place for innovation, right? Our country has been the best in the world in innovation. But then after we finished that innovation, we would go to another continent to scale it up, right? And so now that we have the tools from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act that obviously the senator championed, we now have this set of tools by which to scale up our technology here. And so we now have 203 active applications in the Loan Programs Office seeking $260 billion of debt, right? And then you pair that with equity. So we've got about 550 new facilities that have already been announced or expanded. And so when you think about what we're doing across critical minerals, new nuclear power, hydrogen, carbon sequestration and storage, these are all the next sectors that, that are coming, right? So we've already seen this extraordinary cost decline in solar and wind. With solar, I mean, just to put a fine point on it, when you look at LNG's growth, which has been really extraordinary, solar is growing 2.5 times faster than LNG, right? So when you think about like how fast it's growing, it starts from a small base, and so people say, oh, well, it's so small. But they're now on track to deploying 1,000 gigawatts a year. We got to get the rest of these technologies to go, and that means leaning in on our nation's innovators and entrepreneurs.
So, Senator, champion of the Inflation Reduction Act, I just heard, which sounds right to me from where I see. Are we where you hoped we would be right now with the Inflation Reduction Act, and for that matter, by the bipartisan infrastructure bill?
Let's look at the results we have. First of all, when we did the bipartisan infrastructure bill, there's about $100 billion of investments that were made there into energy. Then we come back with the IRA, and the IRA is about, $380, $390 billion. So we have about $500 billion that myself and my committee wrote, and it was all done for energy security. So all we want is energy security. We wrote a bill, and today you say, what's the product? Well, we have 38 trillion cubic feet of gas produced last year, 4.7 billion barrels of oil, 14 billion cubic feet of LNG, and more wind and more solar and battery power than we've ever done. So it was an all-in energy policy. And my challenge with the administration has been their implementing of the bill. They're implementing things that they didn't pass. They're accelerating and showing certain favors to EVs, making it very difficult for hydrogen, or making it difficult that has any connotation to a fossil base. And I said, that's not how we wrote it. It's just stay with the bill. And I've told them, I says, you're in jeopardy basically of anyone who's been damaged by your misinterpretation, because the bill was written pretty concise, pretty directed, if you will, targeted. And I said, you're going to lose in court. So why not work with us and just implement the bill and the timeliness of the bill? The only reason we did $7,500 credit for EVs, and I kept going back in history, and I kept saying, I said, you know what? When Henry Ford invented the Model T assembly line and mass-produced it, I don't believe we sent checks to anybody to buy one. I don't believe that we built the filling stations. I think the market, you got to believe in, we're capitalists, you believe in the market will do, it'll fill in the need and void. You can't accelerate that, and right now they're getting pushback on EVs. I just checked with all my auto dealers in West Virginia. They can't give them away. They're sitting on the lot. They can't give them away because they just don't produce in mountainous with rough terrain and weather conditions. But with that, it's a great product. It'll find its way. They're just accelerating something. And then what we could be doing as far as total energy dependence, I said, don't remove something that's dispatchable that gives us 24/7 and try to replace it with intermittent. And we've had FERC and NERC come to my committee and says, our grids are getting very, very, very overloaded to the point where it's critical. We're going to have rolling brownouts and blackouts if you keep putting this type of demand on the system. And you're putting in basically, you're early retiring coal-fired plants, what we have left. And I would say to my friend John Podesta, I said, John's my friend, we just disagree. We disagree on the direction they're going and the timeliness of the direction. We're accepting the transition. We're just not going to remove something before you can give me something that does the same thing. And it's pretty simple on that, David. That's what we try to do.
So, Jigar, I want to reassure you, you're going to get a chance to respond to some of that, but first I want to bring Mike Wirth in. Mike, as I listen to this from the private sector, I'm thinking, are there challenges in the way this is being implemented, or is there a fundamental issue about having the government pick which ways we're going to address the climate issue?
Well, I think we've crossed that bridge. The government has inserted itself pretty directly in that, and of course the best way, but also the most difficult way to accomplish this would be just to have a price on carbon, right? Whether it's a carbon tax or a cap and trade system like we see in some other parts of the world, what that would do is it would send a strong signal into the private sector, and you would see investment drawn to the most economic ways to abate emissions for that price. Instead, what we have, and it's all well-intentioned, but we have numbers that have come out of analysis and spreadsheets that might be good based on today's assumptions and today's state of technology, but they may not be good tomorrow. And so, but we've got this, we've got to work with it. I think just to build on one of the things the Senator mentioned, the implementation of the rules. So the legislation directs agencies to then finalize rules. And he mentioned hydrogen. The Department of Energy is doing a lot to push hydrogen development, right? There's these hydrogen hubs, there's billions of dollars that are available, really trying to accelerate investment. We get a lot of private players involved. We're involved in 2 of the hubs. Treasury, on the other hand, is writing the rules, and the rules are getting very restrictive, and they discourage investment, or they make it difficult to get comfortable with a multi-billion-dollar investment the way the rules will be written. So we've got kind of these conflicting signals, and what they tend to do is they slow things down rather than accelerate. And to your point about speed, I think if we really had the incentives aligned and the actions better aligned, I think we'd see the investment proceeding faster. Last thing I'll say is, to build anything, you actually need to get a permit. And that is the undone work of the deal that the Senator engaged in, which is we need real permitting reform in this country.
Yeah. So, Jigar, you do get a chance to respond to some of this now, but I really am struck by the question of whether we are distorting the markets. The markets can be very powerful incentives to get things done. Are we distorting the market in some of the ways? By the way, Senator Manchin mentioned with respect to EVs, essentially we're distorting the market with the demand, and also Mike Wirth said, are we distorting the markets? Is it getting in our way?
Well, look, I think the question really is on what's a market, right? When you think about the market that we operate under now, in Texas, for instance, that's a market that doesn't have a capacity payment. And as a result, they sort of, send through market signals to the marketplace all the time, right? As a result, they have installed more batteries in Texas than any other place in the country in the last year. And even the governor came out and said, actually, our grid was saved by, batteries sort of in that January, February timeframe, right? And so when you think about the distortion impacts, the job of the National Electricity Reliability Council is to make sure that we don't have the challenges that we had in the 1970s with reliability, right? And so, the market is an amazing thing, but when you have, a technology that saves lives, like electricity does, you also need to make sure that some of these other variables are taken care of, right? But I think the other piece that I want to make sure that we're being very careful about is that, in general, we have a lot of inertia, right? Like, I think what, Chevron and the other 4 major companies do are extraordinary, right? But they're at the end of the process, right? They're generally the strong balance sheet that buys folks after they've figured out fracking, and after they've figured out geothermal, and after they've figured out hydrogen and carbon dioxide and all these other things, right? And so one of the things you need in a system like ours to make sure that these innovations actually get into a place where they can actually be heard. So when you look at Tesla, right, I don't think they would be where they are today if we hadn't given them a loan in 2009 to help them build the Model S and get to where they are today, right? And I don't think we'd be where we are in electric vehicles had we not provided that loan. I think the same thing's true with the Delta ACES project that we provided a loan to in Utah. I mean, this is an extraordinary thing, right? 150 gigawatt hours of hydrogen storage in each salt cavern. There's no way that that thing gets built with private sector debt, right, from Wall Street. They don't understand what a salt cavern is. They don't understand what hydrogen is. They don't understand how any of that stuff works. So Congress gave us resources because they wanted us to go first. They wanted us to build the first 6 of something so that the commercial marketplace could then take over. So I'm as big a capitalist as the next guy, right? I mean, I obviously started, a very large, investment firm and solar company before I took this job. But at the same time, I think we all have to acknowledge that our lives are better off because we are accelerating the commercialization of technology.
So what about, Senator, are we getting the level of innovation that we need in energy? I mean, you wrote a piece in the Washington Post actually pointing out that we're in pretty good shape overall as a country in energy, much better than most of us thought 30 years ago. Are we getting the innovation and are we getting into market that we need?
Well, I think basically we've woken up the whole worldwide market, if you will, and the IRA has done that. And I've been confronted by President Macron and Chancellor Schultz and all of them thinking that we did this directly to hurt their markets. And I says, listen, we weren't there to help you when the Ukraine war started. That was the whole crux of how this got started. We'd have never had an IRA bill. I'd have never gone down this path if the Ukraine war that basically Putin using energy as a weapon hadn't magnified to the point that he did, and we couldn't do anything to help. And then they jumped on me about that, and they said, well, all the investments are being sucked out of Europe coming to the United States. I said, let me be very honest with you. I said, I've been over 12, 13 years in the Senate gotten the crap beat out of me because I wouldn't adopt to carbon pricing or carbon taxes. And my only reason for being reluctant to do that was because I could not see the proceeds being used to basically invested back into the market to where we would incentivize the private entrepreneurs to find more technology that would let us build products with less carbon intense. I said, the difference is to President Macron and I says, you've used a stick. You've beat the living crap out of people for the last 20 years on carbon pricing, and you used all the proceeds into your social reforms, not to basically industrialize or basically energize the entrepreneurial spirit. And I told Schultz the same thing. And I said, we used the carrot. You used the stick. Which one do you think worked best? So they're changing now. They're starting to give incentives. It's good. It's good for the world economy.
So, Mike, what do you say about that? I mean, because as a practical matter, we need some money in the government right now. We got some deficit problems from all sorts of different sources. If we went to a carbon tax, how would we avoid it going for purposes that have nothing to do with energy whatsoever, which is Senator Manchin's point?
Well, I think he's exactly right. I mean, that's the real challenge.
Better go in that black hole, Mike.
How do those
Watch it.
How do the funds get used? And
Yeah.
there was a proposal a number of years back from George Schultz and some others that was essentially say that the money would all go back to the taxpayer and that the government wouldn't keep it. It would just reduce other tax burden. I think Jigar makes a good point. We need innovation, and the national labs have long been a source of innovation that have changed our lives for the better for many decades. Our company invests at a venture capital stage in a lot of small companies that are innovating in technologies that we'd like to see be successful, and we'd like to see them scale to the point where we could put a lot of investment into these things. And so we need it all, and I think different companies and different entities play different roles in that ecosystem in our society, and there's a place for it all. Fundamentally, I think markets do the best job of allocating capital, so I think we're at risk of misallocating capital the more we get government into that, because the track record there hasn't been great. But the question of a carbon tax, I think where the revenues ultimately get used is one of the really difficult aspects of it, seeing it ever pass.
Jigar, I don't want to let the permitting comment go by. How about from what you're trying to accomplish? To what extent is the permitting issue a hurdle to get to where you want to go?
Well, the thing with permitting is that it's inherently a local challenge, right? And so there have been, frankly, a lot of mistakes made in the 1940s and 50s where folks were not asked their opinion before, highways were put through their neighborhoods or infrastructure was placed where they live. And so now we're in a place where we are asking people and saying, do you want that near you? In what ways would you like to be compensated if we, did do something here? How would you like for that to happen? That process is one that everyone is figuring out together, right? And so when you think about how that works, remember, we haven't done this level of industrialization in our country for 40 years. We are 3x up our 30-year average for manufacturing right now in this country, right? I mean, having grown up in a small town where we lost the 7th largest steel mill when I was there, right? These decimated communities, and we celebrated sort of Neutron Jack at the time, and now we're sort of at a place where I think people are smarter about it. But I think when you think about the projects that we're involved in, right, we're talking about record timelines, right? I mean, a lot of our projects are getting through NEPA analysis and permits within 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. And so I think we are seeing things go faster. Even Class 6 wells, right, for carbon sequestration and storage, our projects were the ones who got the Class 6 well permits first, right? And that's partially because I think people look at our effort to do due diligence on these projects and trust that we actually are saying that these folks are doing it the right way, that the technology is going to last the test of time, and that this is going to be something that can pay back alone, right?
Senator, you've been outspoken on permitting.
Yeah, let me give you a little breakdown of how we got to where we have and all this energy transformation that's gone on in the 117th Congress, which was the 2021, 22, and 23, those 2 years. The bipartisan infrastructure bill, I saw that I could not get to the BBBs. I got beat up pretty good on that one, but I couldn't get there. But there was some good stuff in there. So we extracted the bipartisan infrastructure because we hadn't done anything in deferred maintenance around the country. And we had Democrat and Republican support. So we pulled that out. We got a group of bipartisan. There was 4 Ds and 4 Rs. We sat down and worked on that. And then we got Chuck Schumer to allow us to have a privilege on the floor if we could come to an agreement. But for that, I had to agree to vote to let them get on the BBB, which they knew I could not support, but I guess they thought they could beat me in the submission. But anyway, we got on the BBB for that. And then that was $100 billion in that whole bipartisan infrastructure that really jump-started the energy revolution we got going on. And then the IRA came about after BBB fell to the wayside in the Ukraine war. But this whole thing on permitting, none of this could be done without permitting reform. It's a 10-year window. So we passed a bill, 2022. 2032, the spending authority runs out. The biggest problem we have with debt in the nation, so you all know, how we've accumulated so much debt in such a quick period of time, more than any time in history and any civilization. In 10 years, we've piled on about $20 trillion of debt. And the games that are being played in Washington that the average person doesn't understand, and most of us had not really taken time to look at it until I did that bill. And what happens is you do a bill and has all these great things in it, and everybody loves it. And it's wildly popular, but you get a CBO scoring. So CBO is guessing, it's a guesstimate of how much this would cost and how much would be utilized over a 10-year period. That's fine, that's an estimate. So we have 10 years of authority to spend with no caps. But you might run out of money in 3 years. And then the other 7 years, because there's no cap on spending, the other 7 years is debt financed. So if you want to know how you piled on, if you're mad at Democrats or mad at Republicans, you should be. Everyone's guilty. No one put a cap. So we're trying to do now, when the CBO score runs out, then the spending authority runs out. And if it's that popular, go back to the legislature and all the outside support will say, we need to find other ways to finance this. That's the proper way to do it so we don't continue to add on more debt that's unresponsible. So right now, I don't want to give any false hope, but we're working very, very diligent. I'm committed before I leave at the end of this year to get really, truly reform done in permitting.
Mike, I'm not sure you could run Chevron the way we run the federal budget. It's a little bit different about making the expenses meet the revenues. But from your point of view at Chevron, are we on a track to get to zero net emissions in the foreseeable future? Take 2050, take whatever number you want to take.
Yeah, we don't do independent work on these things. We rely on things like the IPCC, the International Energy Agency, others that do that work. And I think by all accounts at the most recent COP meeting, we're not on a trajectory that would lead us to be net zero in 2050. And in the last panel, I heard some discussion about the developing economies, where the real opportunities are, because that's where the economic growth, the investment in development still lies ahead, and they have the least ability to afford a more expensive energy system. And so we've got to solve these things so they work not only in Western Europe and in the United States, but that they're economic and affordable for other countries as well. And I think that's going to be the big challenge as you look out towards 2050. Where's the population growing? Where are we going to see the most economic development? And how do we find ways to help build an energy system that serves their needs and also does its part to reduce emissions?
Senator, obviously, you've been a successful politician as well as a businessman.
I don't like politics, but I've been in the game for a long time.
Well, you've won a few elections.
Yeah, I have.
Are the American people committed to getting to net zero emissions? Do they understand what that means? Because generally there's no such thing as a free lunch. There are costs associated with these things.
Anybody who's been a governor or an executive anywhere in the world, if you have an astute business person or someone who's had to meet a budget and has ever had to mortgage their house to get a line of credit, they understand what we're talking about. Governors, 46 states have a balanced budget amendment, and about all 50 states work within it. And as a governor, I used to sit down once a week. I'd sit down with my finance people, and they would tell me what our revenues expected. We had deficiencies, and they give you a warning that we could be in trouble on this, and we might have overestimated revenues. It's not happening. Then the second week, by the third week, they say, okay, Governor, you got to make a decision. We got to start making some adjustments. And we had to get our financial house in order. And I've said the same thing. I can't believe when I came to the Senate at the end of 2010, and in 2011, understanding the system and the accounting system and how they operate made no sense to me whatsoever. I said, no one's looking at this at all or paying attention. At that time, we had the Bowles-Simpson, which I said, that makes all the sense in the world to me. Erskine Bowles and Al Simpson, we tried to work with them. And it got that close, but you could tell no one was committed. No one was totally committed. They put it for a facade to make it look like they were really interested, but they weren't committed to get over the goal line, if you will. Mitt Romney and I have a bill called the Fiscal Responsibility Act. We've been trying to wedge that in that would force this government of ours and have a privilege so they couldn't get us hung up that it wouldn't come to the floor for a vote. But people need to be put on the record. Are you willing in a 15-year period to get your finances in sync with your growth of your economy and the ability for us to maintain this debt without putting a burden on the economy and the average person who's buying these products? We think it's a really good approach. We've been trying to fight to find a place, but every time that comes up, the first thing, everybody gets attacked and they're scared to death, put their name on. Oh, you're going to cut Social Security. No, I'm going to save Social Security. You're going to cut Medicare. No, I'm trying to save Medicare. Because I'm telling all of you right now, if you have a family member who's getting, I'll just round it off to a $1,000 check from Social Security, in the next 7 years they're going to get a check for $800. And everyone's going to be mad as hell. And no one's like, what happened? Well, no one did their job because they're afraid to step forward and try to save it. We can save it responsibly and not cut anything, but make the person who's using it. I'll give you another example. We have total disability. When a person gets harmed in workplace, you want them to be taken care of. We have more younger people getting total disability than ever before. And if you're getting total disability at 40 years of age and you can't, and Medicare starts at 62, we do nothing to find out if you're capable to go back to work. Or maybe get partial, not total. Little things that we could do. And we're not taking away. We're just keeping people productive in society that we need. That's common sense. But today, the politics has been weaponized. My daughter and I and Heather took off on Americans Together trying to educate the public on how you get involved and take it back. 60% of us live in the middle. We're center right, center left. You want the grand old party to be grand again, and you want the Democrat Party to be responsible. But once you send us to Congress, we got no support. You're either sucked to the far left or sucked to the far right, because that's where the noise is. That's where the money's coming in. There's no one defending the sensible middle.
Can I take a crack at your other question?
Please.
So
That is whether we're on a path? Is that the question?
on the net zero path. I think,
Yeah.
I mean, in 2003, I started a company called SunEdison, And the financial model that we created is now done over $2 trillion of transactions in the solar space. And a lot of it's been in developing countries as well. And many of the folks in this room actually put capital into those financial systems. One of the big challenges that we have today around this net zero thing is, first of all, no one understands what that means. And so that's not a consumer term. What people care about is energy efficient appliances, light bulbs. They want a weatherized home. So, when it's negative 20 degrees outside during a polar vortex, they don't have a hard time heating or cooling their home. But one of the things that we have is today's energy system works on a razor blade model, right? You get the razor, and then you got to pay for blades every month for the rest of the time, right? And, it's one of those things where in the developing countries, because interest rates are so high, right, the razor blades work because you don't want to pay CapEx, you want to pay OpEx. I get that, right? That's what we solved when we did the Sun Edison model, and that is what we're doing now with the Loan Programs Office. So whether it's hydrogen or all these things are cheaper. So I would disagree with my friend Mike. Like, these are all cheaper energy technologies. They're not more expensive. The problem is they don't work within the financial construct of the World Bank or the IMF or the way in which a lot of these folks work. And so we are innovating regularly on how to do that. So the reason that they're working in Western Europe or in Texas, first is because we have the rule of law and low cost of capital and all those things. And so you see that almost 80% of everything added to our grid since 2016 has been clean, right? Whether it's nuclear or solar or wind or hydro or whatever, right? And so I just want to make sure that we're crystal clear for this audience. The stuff that we're funding now has now been proven to be the cheapest energy that you can get. So that's not the issue. The issue is now, how do we figure out how to fit it within the modern finance system, right? So when you look at a company like Chevron or Exxon or others, these are folks who have a unified balance sheet. They don't really do project finance. They have corporate equity, corporate debt. So their weighted average cost of capital might be 12%. The cost of capital for most solar projects funded today is at 7. It's not surprising to me that the CEO of Shell is like, I can't make money at 7. I get it. That's not how your business model works. But that doesn't mean that the stuff is expensive. It just means it's not right for your business.
Yeah. So actually, it really leads me back to you, Mike. The question I wanted to ask you is climate good business, or can it be good business? I mean, just as a business matter.
I mean, it's clearly a good business.
Well, we know what you think, Jigar.
No, but I mean, to be clear, it's twice as large as the oil and gas industry today, right? Solar alone is $1 billion a day, right? And so, clearly, these people in the room have already spoken.
Okay, so we know what Jigar thinks. Mike, what do you think?
Well, look, there are a host of solutions out there, and we need them all. Because for high heat manufacturing, you've got a different set of solutions than you do for residential heating or cooking. And there's a suite of power generation applications that you need because you got certain demand loads that don't vary with the wind or with the sun. And so we need to be ruling in solutions. We need to find the solutions that work in different places. And the cost of capital is one of the factors that affects us. I think the other thing just to remember is, in doing this, we're replacing a system that works today, right? That provides the energy that runs the world today with another system that has now paid for trying to mitigate an externality, right? The emissions impact. And so we're going to spend a lot of capital to add no practical functionality to the system, right? It'll still keep the lights on, it'll keep the trains running, but we'll spend an enormous amount of capital just to replace something that's already working today and deal with mitigating this externality. It's going to cost more in aggregate. It's going to have certain inflationary impacts within the economy, and I think we've got to watch the impact of that on growth, on debt, on what it does to the life of the average person.
Just about out of time. Last word to you, Senator.
I just think as human beings, we're responsible for the climate. We've contributed to what we have today, and we have the ability to fix it. But it's called global climate, and I try to tell all of my friends in the climate world, they're really advocates. I said, it's not called West Virginia climate or California climate or United States or North America. It's called global. And you cannot eliminate your way to a cleaner environment. You can innovate it, but you can't eliminate it. If someone has energy sources in their backyard, they're going to use it. They said, well, United States, you used everything you have to build the greatest economy. You're going to refuse me from using what I have? No, it's not going to work that way. And on that, we can use the strength of this wonderful economy of ours as an enticement for people to use the technology we developed. All the tools are there. And all we have to look at is basically not let the politics get wrapped up and get us ahead of ourselves to where we're basically forcing something on the market when you're in a capitalist society that the market's not ready for it. Or you're basically taking something away from me that's worked. So anything I can tell anyone, I can show you in West Virginia, our political system changed faster than any place in the world. We changed from 80% being registered Democrats in a 10-year period to 80% being registered Republicans. How did it happen? They took the jobs away and had nothing for them. You left people basically says, well, we don't like what you're doing. Now, even though you've done everything to make this country what it is, you've mined the coal, made the steel, built the guns and ship, worked in the factories, but we're done with you now. And I said, don't ever take someone's job away unless you have one as good, if not better, to give them an opportunity to. And that's what has happened. So as we transition, we've got to make sure that the areas that have been left behind don't get left behind. And this is what Mike and them, and he'll tell you, what they have done in investing in all the above energy sources, it's unbelievable. And everyone beating on our energy producers, but they're producing energy cleaner than anywhere in the world. And then they're letting Venezuela back into the market. They stopped them again. They let them in, took them back out, turning a blind eye to ghost ships coming out of Iran. They're supporting terrorist operations around the world. Some of this doesn't make sense to me at all, Dave.
And that is the last word. Senator Manchin.
God bless America.
Mike Wirth, thank you so much.